All right, time to continue on with some more of the college football 2024 season previews. Today, going with the SEC here with the LSU Tigers. Now, the LSU Tigers, they finished last year's regular season at 9-3. Their losses came against Alabama, Ole Miss, and Florida State. Florida State obviously went undefeated. Ole Miss only lost 2 games, and that was against Georgia and Alabama. And Alabama only lost 1 game in the SEC and went on to the playoffs. So, not really a lot of shame in losing to those 3 teams. LSU, of course, 9-3. They end up getting invited to the ReliaQuest Bowl, where they would beat Wisconsin, and they would finish the season with a total of 10-3. Now, somebody commented on my Oklahoma State season preview and said that bowl games aren't really mattering a lot because players opt out a lot. That is true. And obviously, to those players, the game meant nothing. Couldn't care less about them. But the players that are playing in the game obviously care. The coaches obviously care. The fans who paid for their tickets obviously care. And then most importantly, those bowl games do count for the season's official records. So that's why I include them here. But anyway, 10-3, not really bad. Um, Major departures, obviously, Jaden Daniels. That's going to be the biggest hit overall for LSU is losing Jaden Daniels. Obviously, we all know the story. Comes in 2022 as a transfer from Arizona State. Immediately becomes the starter in Brian Kelly's new system. He obviously was very mobile, which benefited them in the running game a lot. Had to go through some growing pains in terms of his passing game, but obviously he improved it a lot. Won the Heisman last year, 2023, and there was a lot of those games last year where if LSU didn't have Daniels, they wouldn't have won it. So Daniels definitely a benefit for them. He's going now. Gets drafted, I believe, second overall. Other Another key departure on the offense, Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors, number one wide receiver for LSU for the past couple of years. He's now going to the NFL as well. Did make a few key gains on the offensive side of the ball. They bring in John Emery, who was a former LSU running back. He had some productive games with LSU. He transferred out, but now he transfers back in. So that's going to help boost LSU in the running game, which I think they're going to need now. Last year, you didn't really need the running game as much because you had Jaden Daniels' ability to escape the pocket and make plays with his legs. Garrett Nussmeier, who's the presumed starter for LSU in 2024, does not have the ability to escape the pocket. Now, Garrett Nussmeier is probably going to end up being a better passer than Jaden Daniels was, but in terms of his mobility, he's almost a stationary object. So you're going to have to rely on your running backs in order to create some plays now that Jaden Daniels is no longer there. So getting in a running back who was productive for you in the past, that's going to help you a lot. Now, we all know what LSU's big weakness was last year was the defense. Your defense is going to have to get a bunch better than it was last year when you played. Your defense cost you in a lot of games last year. Ole Miss, it cost you there. Florida State obviously cost you there. Alabama cost you there. That Wisconsin game was a lot closer in the final score than it really should have been. You can blame your defense for that. what else can I say about LSU's defense that hasn't already been said, other than it wasn't very good last year? Now you did overhaul your defensive staff, which should help a little bit with your defense, but your players have to get a lot better than they were last year. Now, luckily, most of them do return, so that experience helps you there. How much will that defense actually improve? We don't know. Now, I'm going to make the predictions based on the assumption that LSU's defense is going to improve because of their experience and because they overhauled their defensive staff. Keep in mind that if the defense does not improve, a lot of the games that I'm going to predict LSU to win in this video are going to go much differently. Now, another notable thing is that Brian Kelly is now in his third year at LSU and has won 10 games in every one of those 2 seasons. He went 10-4 in 2022, making it to the SEC title game. Obviously, they lost to Georgia, who would then go on to win the Natty again. Last year, they went 10-3, third in the West, behind Ole Miss and Alabama. Bryant Denny's third year and everywhere he's coached has been his best year, most notably at Notre Dame, when his third year at Notre Dame became the year they made it to the national title game. Now, can we expect that from LSU this year? A lot of people probably say no. I would be one of those people that would agree LSU's probably not going to get to the national title this year. But year 3 may very well end up being the best year LSU has had so far under Brian Kelly. Now that we got that out the way, let's go ahead and start looking at LSU's schedule. I'm going to pull it up right here on my mobile phone real quick. Give me a second. Probably should have had that already there, but I apologize. And here we are. If this thing would even load. And there we go. And it's up. Alright, so first game for you this year going to be on Sunday, September 1st. If you're unaware, week 1 is the only week in the college football season that does not coincide with games on the regular season of the NFL. So week 1 is always going to have games on Thursday night, games on, I believe, Friday night. Yeah, every week has Friday night and Thursday night games, and obviously Saturday games. But week 1 also has one Sunday game, and it also gets a Monday game. LSU, for the third year in a row, falls on the Sunday game, and it's going to be a neutral site game in Las Vegas against the USC Trojans. Now, a lot of the things I said about LSU's defense, you can also apply to USC's defense. They were absolutely horrible. Actually, both of the 2 years so far, they've been under Lincoln Riley, but last year was when it shined through the weaknesses much more, because 2022, they had an amazing offense. Caleb Williams won the Heisman. Last year, I don't know if teams figured out Caleb Williams, but he didn't do nearly as good, and the offense as a whole didn't nearly do as good. The defense, again, stunk up the joint. But just like LSU, USC's overhauling their defensive staff. They get rid of Alex Grinch, who I think is probably the worst defensive coordinator in modern college football history. They're bringing in some new key pieces to help with the defense. Now, the major concern for me with USC is that they have to break in a new starting quarterback. That he did play in a bowl game last year, but not a lot of people even saw that bowl game because it was a lower level bowl game. But he did play well in that bowl game, so maybe he does do well in this season. I think USC has to take advantage of their non-conference games more than ever, because their conference games, they're jumping from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. In the Pac-12, USC was constantly one of the bigger dogs in the fight. Big Ten, you can expect them to be more lower level because that conference has been carved up by Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. USC is not going to be one of the bigger dogs for at least a couple years in the Big Ten. So I think in order to build up some credibility, they'll have to take advantage of their non-con schedule, and that starts with LSU. I think the two teams are quite similar to each other, offensively and defensively. And neutral site, obviously, neither of the teams are going to have home field advantage here. Ultimately, what I went with is that LSU seems to have some very weird luck lately when it comes to Week 1 games. 2020, they ended up losing to Mississippi State, who for a while would only have one win until late in the season. Then in 2021, just everything went wrong for LSU in the weeks leading up to the game. Starting quarterback broke his arm. A hurricane chased them out of their own state, and then they had to practice in Texas before playing a game in California. 2022, they completely sucked all the way into the end of the fourth quarter when they finally come within tying the game, but then their extra point gets blocked. And then last year, their team just completely fell asleep in the second half. Until LSU can actually find a way to avoid the world's weirdest bad luck in Week 1 games, I'm not predicting them to win a Week 1 game, and I predict USC is actually going to beat LSU in Week 1. Good thing is you go back home and you play Nicholls State, who's an FCS team. I think you dominate. Then you go at South Carolina, which is going to be your first SEC game of the year. And South Carolina, a lot of people had really high expectations of South Carolina last year, and they failed every single one of them. 5-7 record last year. A lot of people kind of been calling for Beamer to be fired. Opinions are really split on him. Some of them think that he's going to be gone if he doesn't have a winning season this year. Others say not necessarily this year, but he's got to turn around the luck he's had at South Carolina in order to stay for long term. Either way, I think LSU is good enough to beat South Carolina, so I have them beating South Carolina. Then you go back home and you play another non-conference game against somebody that's going to the Big Ten, UCLA. I briefly brought it up when I was talking about the Week 1 games that LSU has lost over the past few years. One of them was to UCLA. That was the one where starting quarterback broke his arm with a month before the season. Then a hurricane chased them out of their own state. This is that get-back game from that one. UCLA is nowhere near as good as they were then, and they're going to be horrible. I don't think they're going to be that good this year. Chip Kelly, who was the head coach that made them good, leaves. He's going to Ohio State to be the offensive coordinator. And I think that UCLA is going to get blown out by LSU. Then you stay at home to play South Alabama. Again, blow them right out the water. So I have you winning 4 of your first 5 games. Then you get your first bye week on the week of October 5th. Then you play Ole Miss. Now, one thing I do want to bring up is Ole Miss's luck in Tiger Stadium, because the game is in Tiger Stadium. I don't remember if it was 2008 or 2009, but it was one of those 2 years. Was the last time Ole Miss beat LSU in Tiger Stadium. All of Ole Miss's wins ever since then have been in Ole Miss's home stadium. However, I do think luck kind of changes for them this year. They're clearly better than LSU is going to be this year. Their offense is going to be spectacular. Lane Kiffin his defense is going to be better than LSU's probably. They had the number 1 transfer portal class this past offseason. I lost count of how many that is in a row. You get the point. Lane Kiffin's just really good at building a roster, and I think this year is going to be where things start to really come together for Ole Miss this year. And unlike a certain other coach who I'm going to point out later in the video, Lane Kiffin knows how to coach in Tiger Stadium because he's already done so twice. So I don't think it's going to be as much of a factor as it's going to be in a certain later game in the year. I think Ole Miss beats LSU. I have you losing in your own stadium against Ole Miss, probably in very disappointing fashion. I think it's going to be very similar to last year, where it's close all the way through, only for LSU to fall apart at the worst possible time near the end of the game. So I have you at this point 4-2 with your losses coming to USC and Ole Miss. Then you have to go 2 consecutive road games, which this is also going to be this is probably the toughest point in the schedule. You're at home against Ole Miss. Then you have 2 consecutive road games. The first of them being against Arkansas. Arkansas is one of 4 teams who I believe one of those 4 is going to be the worst in the SEC. Vanderbilt, obviously. You've probably heard me drop a lot of hints about Florida recently. Mississippi State and Arkansas is also one of them. Arkansas looked like they were going to be good under Pittman. He brought them to heights we hadn't seen since 2012. In 2021, we thought they were going to... What we see Ole Miss as now, we thought Arkansas was going to be. But then it all fell apart. Now, Pittman, I think, does have one... This is his final chance to prove he's worth keeping. He does bring in offensive coordinator Bobby Petrino, which, as much as Arkansas fans probably hate him because of what happened in the past, he knows how to coach offense. I don't think it makes the difference, though, in this game against LSU. I think LSU beats Arkansas in Arkansas. Then you go on the road and you play Texas A&M. Texas A&M is going to be slightly... I think they're going to be slightly improved because they finally get rid of Jimbo Fisher, who had the program basically stagnant ever since he took over in 2018. They also are going to reform their staff completely. It's worth bringing up a stat here that LSU... the last time LSU won in College Station, which is where Texas A&M is at and where the game between Texas A&M and LSU is played this year, was 2016. Ever since then, the home team has won every time LSU and Texas A&M play together. And in the most recent games LSU's played in College Station, 2018 was the infamous 74-72 game that caused college football to change their overtime rules to after second overtime is a 2-point conversion contest. Then in 2020, Texas A&M again beats LSU in College Station. Then 2022, did I say 2022 twice? If I did, I meant 2020 first. And then 2022, infamously, LSU was a week away from playing Georgia in the SEC title game. People thought they were going to blow out Texas A&M. Instead, Texas A&M gets the upset win. I think Texas A&M is going to have a better offense this year. Defense, I'm not sure. I think Texas A&M does get the win over LSU in College Station. Now, the good news after that game is you have your second bye week. Unfortunately, though, it plays against Alabama. Now, this part of the video is going to be a little bit long because I have a lot to say about it. So if you want to skip directly to who I picked to win this game, I am going to leave a timestamp in the comments so you can just skip directly there. Now, I've put what I predict the game is going to result in other forums like SG1 Sports, Uncle Lou, and I keep getting other Alabama fans who say that, oh, do you forget that Alabama owns LSU in Tiger Stadium? Now that historically is true that Alabama historically owns LSU in their own home stadium. However, you look at our side of the millennium, 2000 beyond, there was a point where it looked like LSU was actually going to be the one who owns Alabama in Tiger Stadium. 2000, they beat LSU beats Bama in Tiger Stadium. 2004 and 2006. What changed after 2006? If you guessed that Alabama hired Nick Saban, you would be correct. Nick Saban comes in. He had already coached for LSU at that point, so he knew the Tiger Stadium environment and what was needed to beat LSU in that environment, and that's why he had success in Tiger Stadium. But if you really read between the lines, it's not as clear cut and clear as day that Alabama would dominate in Tiger Stadium. In fact, let's start with the obvious. 2010 and 2022, LSU squeaks out victories in that. Now, a lot of you are saying, well, what's the real concern if the only two times Alabama has lost to LSU in Tiger Stadium was those 2 years? Well, look at years like where Alabama played a clearly inferior LSU team in Tiger Stadium. 2008, Alabama went undefeated in the regular season and made it to the conference title game, whereas LSU went 7-5 in the regular season with a losing record in the SEC. Alabama needed overtime to beat LSU in Tiger Stadium. 2012, we already said what happened in 2010. 2012, okay, maybe they're not inferior to Alabama because they did go 10 wins, but that was a stacked Alabama team that had players like Eddie Lacy, T.J. Yeldon, Amari Cooper, A.J. McCarron, C.J. Mosley, a whole bunch of Alabama legends, and then not to mention that team actually won the national title game where they famously destroyed Notre Dame. They needed to score a touchdown in the last minute and come from behind in order to beat LSU in Tiger Stadium. 2014, LSU 8-5 overall that year, whereas Alabama went 12-2 and made the playoff. Alabama needed overtime in order to beat LSU in Tiger Stadium. 2016, Alabama goes 14-1, famously the runner-up in the national title game, only to Clemson. LSU, on the other hand, only managed to win 8 games, and they ended up going to the Citrus Bowl. Alabama didn't score in the first 3 quarters of the game, and the score was only 10-0 in favor of Alabama. Heck, 2018 even to an extent. Alabama, who had Tua Tagovailoa, who I believe would have won the Heisman had it not been for his injury in the SEC title game, they don't get going until about the mid-third quarter. And they were just lucky that the defense held on to shut LSU out. You'll get the point by this point. Tiger Stadium, even in the Nick Saban era, has been a difficult place to play for Alabama on this side of the millennium. Now, I brought up the previous stat of 2000 to 2006 with LSU going 3-1 against Alabama in Tiger Stadium because the Saban era is over. And in that era, there was constant new coaches In fact, I believe every coach that coached against LSU in that era was a new coach for Alabama. This year there is another new coach, and his name is Kalen DeBoer. Now, I have confidence in Kalen DeBoer. I believe he's the best thing that could have happened to Alabama in the post-Saban era. But DeBoer has not coached in an environment nearly as hostile to the visiting team as LSU. LSU's Tiger Stadium is consistently ranked number one for worst stadiums for a visiting team to play at because the crowd is just absolutely raucous. Now, that is, I believe, is going to combine on with the fact that I believe LSU's offense is probably going to be in the top 5 this year because they're going to have a much improved passer in the form of Nussmeier. John Emery's coming back to help the running game. The passing game is probably going to be a lot better, and I do think the defense is going to be better, combined with the fact that Alabama's going to have some holes this year. I think LSU beats Alabama in Tiger Stadium, getting what may end up going down this year, if it happens, as the biggest upset of the upcoming college football season. I know a lot of my fellow Alabama fans really probably don't agree with that. And if you're a fellow Alabama fan and if you don't agree with that, I invite you in the comments section civilly to explain why you think Alabama will beat LSU this year, other than the simple explanation of we own LSU in Tiger Stadium. But I think with the factors that I've explained, the crowd, the fact that I think LSU is going to be improved on both sides of the ball this year, and DeBoer not being nearly as used to coaching in an environment like Tiger Stadium, I think those factors combine to give LSU the upset win. Then after Alabama, you go on the road to play Florida. Now, I've already explained in other videos why I think Florida is going to be horrible. Napier completely mismanaged the building of that team. Graham Mertz is probably going to be the only bright spot for Florida this year. Trevor Etienne transferred out to transferred out to Georgia. I think Billy Napier is probably fired by this point, and they appoint some lower-level coach within the system to just oversee Florida's ultimate demise until they bring in the next head coach. With all that said, I think LSU should dominate Florida. Then you play Vanderbilt. I already explained them as probably being, well, they are the worst SEC team, and they've been for the better part of their existence in the SEC. So I think you should dominate Vanderbilt. Then you go back home. Well, Vanderbilt was already home. I forgot to say that. But then you stay at home and you play SEC newcomer Oklahoma. The same thing as I just said about Alabama, you can say about Oklahoma. Coach who hasn't coached in nearly a hostile environment like that. LSU being maybe the offense isn't improved because Jaden Daniels is not there, but there's still going to be a great offense. Defense, I expect to be better. And, I want to add on to the fact that Oklahoma is playing an SEC schedule for the first time in their existence. I think LSU should be able to take care of Oklahoma. So there you go. I have LSU going 9-3. I think the early part of the schedule, LSU probably falters more in because they're still trying to work out the kinks in the defense, and that's also when they play some of their tougher opponents, USC, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. But then by the second bye week, they've had their kinks figured out, and then that's when they start to really show what they're truly made of. And that's why I think their only losses are going to be to USC, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. I don't think they lose to Alabama, and I don't think they lose to Oklahoma. Now, do I think LSU necessarily makes the playoffs? Maybe. Maybe if they find a way to overcome the week one woes they've had in recent years and manage to beat USC, then I would see LSU going to the playoff because they would be a 10-2 SEC team. But in all likelihood, I think LSU goes 9-3, and I don't think that's going to be enough to make the playoff this year. Even if all that happens, if you watch my Michigan prediction video, I had Michigan with the exact same record, but I think Michigan plays a slightly tougher schedule, which is why if a 9-3 team were to get in, I think it would be Michigan. But I don't think a 9-3 team gets in at all this year. I think you have to win at least 10 games to get in the playoff this year. I mean, look. Last year, if there would have been a 12-team playoff, a 9-3 team wouldn't have gotten in. Heck, we had a 13-0 team get rejected from the 4-team playoff. We saw a 12-1 team that otherwise in the 4-team playoff era would have gotten in fell to number 6. An 11-1 team was number 7. You get the picture. I think in a 12-team playoff era, at least for now, a 9-3 team will not be able to get in this year. But anyway, that is your LSU 2024 season preview. I haven't actually decided officially who the next one is. I'll update y'all on Twitter when I decide who the next team is going to be. And then, of course, you can subscribe to the channel, and then you'll know when the next team pops up. Anyway, I'll see you later.